Hello, Inbar Rothschild.
Hello, Guillem. How are you?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm okay.
I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. You are a concert pianist. You were a pupil of Pnina Salzman, who herself was a pupil of Alfred Cortot, from whose interpretative tradition you therefore descend, and you play a rather French style of pianism with warm sound, distinguished phrasing, full of imagination, and an extraordinary freedom. But first of all, could you tell us a bit about your career?
Of course. Well, I think I had a rather extraordinary, you know, course in my career because I started playing at a rather late age. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't come from a musical family. It's just that we got this cassette tape of Rubinstein playing Chopin favorites, and I just fell in love with the music. So my parents got a piano, and I started playing. And my first teacher was Romanian, and she was a pupil of a very famous Romanian, professor, Florica Muzicescu, who was also, I think, also taught Rado Lupo and perhaps even Dino Lipati. So she was a very good teacher. And then when I was 15 years old, I had a master class with the Israeli pianist Pnina Salzman, and that was just an amazing experience because she had this, you know, way of approaching the music that I never experienced before, and it was just wonderful. So I asked her if she would teach me, and she accepted me. So I started studying with her, first of all privately, and then I did my bachelor and master's degree in the Tel Aviv University, the Music Academy, and with her. And unfortunately, she passed away in the second year of my master's, and I completed it on my own, but then I had this sort of crisis and I sort of stopped playing for almost a decade. I mean, I had concerts here and there, chamber music with friends who invited me, but there were times that I didn't play for months and months in between. And I had a family in the meanwhile. And then, following a personal crisis, I got back to the piano and then I applied to the Royal Academy of Music in London and I was accepted to an amazing PhD program, and I wrote my doctorate there about my teacher and her tradition, and got back to the piano and recorded lots of pieces. And nowadays I perform here in Israel and also a little bit in the UK and in Europe. And yeah, and I also just recently recorded a first album that is supposed to be released later on this year.
So you're not just an instrumentalist and a performer, you're also a great thinker about music and performance in general. And last year in 2024, you defended at the Royal Academy of Music in London your own thesis, your own PhD, which was called In Search of Poetic Understanding, based largely on your reading of Alfred Cortot and the teaching of Pnina Salzman. How do you come to write a thesis, and could you talk about yours?
Yes, well, this was really a dream of mine to do this project ever since my teacher, ever since Pnina passed away, because I felt that what she gave us, all of her pupils, was so special. And really, it's a tradition that is now sort of, you know, we don't see as many musicians playing this style anymore. And I think it's rather special and we should preserve it. So when she passed away, I actually gathered many of her pupils and started this project, but it was hard to pursue on my own. And then over a decade later, I started doing it, for my thesis in the Royal Academy. And really, I gathered many comments from scores, from interviews with pupils from her own scores as well, and lots of reading about Cortot, about his style, because she carried on this torch, this tradition herself. And also, they had this amazing program where, I could really I could be very creative and imaginative with how I present things. So I also recorded lots of pieces and did these interpretation videos where I try to relate, how, the instructions on the score relate to the meaning and all of the metaphors that really, that was what Pnina taught us. And the way for talked in this very poetic and romantic atmosphere about music. I hope to publish it, more commercially as a book in the future as well.
But you're also, perhaps you are above all, a concert pianist. And I know it's an extremely broad question, but how does Pnina Salzman's teaching find its way into your playing today?
Oh, well, she's with me all the time. And I think not only me, but everyone who knew her keep learning from her and keep something of her spirit with us when we approach the instrument, when we approach music. I think first and foremost, she was just a wonderful human being. And she transmitted a lot of love and care in everything that she did, to her pupils, to her friends, to the music, of course, and to the composers, which she considered, she considered herself a servant of the composer. And she considered music making, something of, sacred work. So whenever I play, I think these ideals that she had of, transmitting the meaning of the music and understanding it better and really reaching this complete identification with what we play and living it from within. This is something that I aspire to when I approach the piano. And I think it was with me all along. I think people who fall in love with music, it's inside them, and they need, it's somewhat of a need to be there completely, and it's also very healing to do that. There is something, making music is a sublimating experience, because even when you play something that is very sad or painful, you make something beautiful out of it. So there is something really hopeful about it, I think. And this is something that I still carry on.
And now, if you can identify your own approach, how do you construct your interpretations and how do you put together a concert program?
Well, first of all, everything that I play must be something that I really love, because otherwise I don't see the point. And I struggle to do well with the music, so I always try to find things to love about what I play. And I think they're a little bit two different questions, because as for the constructing as an interpretation, first of all, I mean, I try to read the music. I try to relate to every instruction in the score. I try to understand what it means. Like if I have a melody or a phrase, I try to understand what it speaks about. Because a lot of times I think we tend to relate to music in terms of either, singing or dancing, which is also a big part of it. But there is also a lot of, elements of speech that I think that are carried on. And so all of these metaphors, whether it's asking or answering or begging or pleading, or, there is what kind of a character is there, what kind of an image, and that gives me also a lot of indication about the way that I'd like to perform it. I mean, what sort of touch am I going to apply for it? The pedaling, the phrasing, how am I going to construct it with the dynamics, the texture, everything really it speaks of. And then and of course there's also a matter of style of the composer, and trying to really understand the era and understand the world that he lived in, whether it's the architecture around him or what inspired him. So there is also some reading involved. And I think this is essential because, I mean, first of all, the great composers, they were geniuses, obviously, and whatever inspired them, we'd like to know in creating their pieces. And also, it sort of creates this connection, sort of, I can identify much better with the experience while I'm creating the music myself. Because ultimately, I think it's a very personal process, and I'm probably speaking more of myself than of Chopin or Beethoven or whoever it is that I'm playing. But I think being close or feeling close to whatever inspired them, it gives a lot. And ultimately, creating music is something about connecting to the composer, to the music, and also to the audience at the end of the day. So that's what I try to do. And as for building a concert program, sometimes I have a theme that I try to sort of stay true to. I also like to keep, similar keys and feel the progression between the pieces. Sometimes there is idea to an idea that I try to do lighter and heavier pieces, or have some sort of a contrast, but sometimes I actually try to remain with the same realm. So it's really whatever I feel like or asked to, if it's something that someone else orders. Yeah.
So when you are constructing your own interpretation, do you firstly think about the audience's perception and what we might call aesthetic reception? Or do you start from principles immanent to the score that you will then present to the audience?
Well, I think I always start from the piece itself, from the score, and from whatever I understand, whatever I interpret within it. I think the audience is still, for me, I have somewhat of a stage fright, so I try to ignore that part. But recently, I also try to consider that. And obviously, if I play in a different hall on a different instrument, I take into consideration, the resonance and, the instrument. And also, I think as a performer, you sort of have a feeling for the audience, whether they're restless or whether they're very attentive, and you have this silence in the hall, and you can have more flexibility with time and take them on to the journey, or you need to excite them more sometimes. So you have that moment or those moments in the performance as well. But for the most part, for me, it's a very personal experience, and I like to be in my own, bubble, my own world with the music. So it really depends. But for the most part, I think I try to think of the piece first and whatever it requires.
Alfred Brendel, the pianist, wrote that the interpreter is comparable to a rhetorician. Like the rhetorician, he has something to say, a message to convey. But Brendel immediately adds that the performer has something to instruct the audience. And do you think that a successful performance has to change our perception or even our conception of the work?
It's interesting. I think it can change our conception, but I don't know if it's necessary. I think it needs to convince. It needs to be something that someone can connect to, and ideally, to be completely absorbed in. If the audience can, jump into this same universe with the performer, with the music, and be completely absorbed in it, and experience this dream, this image, and the intensity of the emotions there, I think that's an amazing experience to go on this journey together. Whether it has to change a perception, I'm not sure, but it has to have an effect. It has to take you on with it. That's my opinion.
And do you notice any radical differences between your studio performances and your live performances, or even between two concerts? Do you adapt your own conception of the work to the circumstances, or perhaps it adapts a little bit on its own?
So yes, really, I think that every performance is different, and whenever I play a different instrument, whenever I'm in a different hall, it's going to feel different for me, and obviously the audience as well. I rather like studio recordings because, as I told you, sometimes I get very nervous during performances, and that has upsides as well. But for me, it can be also terrifying. While when I'm on my own in a studio or hall recording, I have a better opportunity to be, to really soak into, the music and be completely within this world. And I think sometimes I reach very special moments when I have the opportunity to make, different takes and really have time to think about and to get absorbed in all of these emotions and whatever the music offers at that moment. And those are the best times for me personally. During a performance, I have the audience in mind as well, and that takes away a little bit of my concentrations at time. But at the same time, there is something very beautiful about living it with people around, and about giving something to someone that is listening, at the hall when I'm playing. So there are definitely also special moments there. It's just harder for people who are introverts to feel comfortable in theory with that concept. I think, but there were also amazing musicians like, Chopin, my favorite composer. He had stage fright. At the same, so he didn't play a lot of concerts, but at the same time, when he did play, sometimes there were amazing experiences, according to his contemporaries who heard him. But it really depends.
Talking about studio and live performances, it's a great occasion to say that in 2023, for your thesis, you recorded an extraordinary version of Chopin's Preludes, which is available on your YouTube channel, and the link is, of course, in the description of this video. And in the studio, we get several takes. But for you, is it so good to control what you do when you're playing?
Yes. Well, first of all, this recording of the Preludes, I didn't have a lot of takes because I only had a couple of hours to record the entire set, and in the end there was a chord that broke in the piano as well, so I had to stop. But for me, I like the opportunity to have different takes and to really, find my way and reach this ideal of music that I have in my mind, because there is one. At the same time, I have this complete admiration for, golden age pianists who had only one take to record in the very early, 20th century, beginning of the recording industry. And the spontaneity, and the hearing, you can hear 4 different versions of Chopin Ballade with Alfred Cortot, and each one is completely different. And the living quality of this is, it's incomparable. But there is something still very nice about the opportunity to, to just sit with the music and have a few attempts at something that you really care about, and really, getting to the best version of what you'd like to transmit, to pass on.
And talking about great pianists from the past, Claudio Rao said that to be human is to experience anxiety. And he adds, I believe that to feel anxiety, the anxiety that comes simply from being human, gives us the power to invest ourselves in any other emotion, in anything human. I see this gift of sympathy as one of the essential virtues of the performer. And you, Inbar, do you use emotions like anxiety to promote empathy in your work? And do you think that being an interpreter means showing empathy? And if so, is it more towards the composer, towards the audience, towards the work considered emotionally in itself, or perhaps all three in the same time?
Yes, I think empathy is a huge part of being an artist and musician and human as well. And I think all of the above really showing, I mean, the ability to empathize with the music, with the composer, with the person in the audience who shares your experience while you're playing is immensely important. As for anxiety, it's definitely also a part of creating music. And I think also Alfred Cortot used to talk about it. And I remember Pnina telling me that, you know, if you don't feel this anxiety, if you don't have, I mean, it means it's like falling in love because if you don't have these butterflies when you meet the person that you care about, or if you don't, you know, when you care about someone, you also worry, you know, it's a complete package. It's something about, you know, having emotions for something, for someone. It means that, you know, that you're afraid, that you're happy, that, you know, sometimes sad. It's all the above, really. So it is necessary. And I think it also brings out something very special and this very living quality that we'd like to preserve. At the same time, it's not easy to expose yourself in this way in front of an audience. And I think performers, a lot of us, we dread the performances. My teacher used to say, Pnina, she used to say, the two happiest days in the life of a performer is the day that they book a concert and then the day that the concert is canceled for whatever reason, because it's, you know, it's such a relief that you don't have to do, I mean, because you're really going up on stage and you're exposing your deepest, you know, emotions and secrets. And sometimes it can be scary. But there is also something very beautiful about it. And when it comes out well, I think there is nothing more special than this living and very caring and empathetic quality.
You know, I have a huge admiration for Vladimir Sofronitsky. And Sofronitsky said that you can't play well by chance, that you can only play badly by chance. And perhaps my question will be a little bit tricky on this way, but do you agree with him? I mean, are you often surprised in front of the keyboard, for example?
I'm sometimes surprised in front of the keyboard, but I think I do agree with him. I think playing well is a matter of so many elements that come together. You know, first of all, you have to have the technical preparation and, you know, getting to know the piece and everyone, you know, every nuance within it. And, you know, also having the personal preparation within yourself. So when you play well, there are a lot of elements that go into it in order to, it doesn't just happen by chance, even with the most intuitive, you know, musicians. Playing badly, well, that can happen as well, but, you know, it depends also on so many factors. I mean, the way that you feel that day and the hearing, how your hands are, what instrument you're playing. And yes, not always we are the the most ideal versions of ourselves. So there can be a lot of things that go wrong. As for being surprised, I think sometimes during concerts, when I'm playing, sometimes there is this, momentary inspiration, and you try something that you haven't tried before, and you hear it coming out, and that it can be very good and it can be very bad as well. But but yes, sometimes there is a surprise, because sometimes something happens that you didn't really expect, and it's quite magical when that happens. So yes.
And now I'd like to talk a bit more about your inspirations, Inbar, if you don't mind. You know the channel, you know the website. Here we're mainly talking about interpretation, and even more often about interpreters from the past. So I wanted to talk about your inspirations because, as you said, you're a big fan of historical interpretations. And first of all, why is it that Golden Age pianism is the one that speaks to you the most? Do you find this Golden Age pianism more authentic?
Well, I think the reason it speaks to me the most is that there is this very personal quality with each artist that I listen to, or at least the ones that I love the most. And a very intense expression that comes out of every note that they play. When you hear Alfred Cortot on the piano, I mean, it's not just playing the piano, it's really speaking. And there is this incredible depth that, touches something like, the core, the strings of my heart in a way that sometimes more, other interpretations or more contemporary interpretations sometimes I feel are more subjective, objective, I meant to say, more objective, more, there is a lot of clarity, and there is a lot of adhering to the text in some ways, but in other ways I don't feel that there is this similar exploration of the meaning and the way that you hear, if you hear Vladimir Horowitz or Alfred Cortot, Pnina Salzman, or if it's Beno Moshevitz or Sofronitsky or Maria Yudina, each of them has this very distinct tone as well. Even just in hearing, one note, sometimes you can recognize from that, and they're not afraid also to break some molds in the name of interpretation, and really do something completely out of the ordinary. And also there is some elegance, I don't know, I feel like there is some old world elegance about everything that they do, the embellishments, the rhythm, the pedaling, that there is something that I don't know if it's just the style of playing in their era, or things that were passed on from composers that really were still alive at the time, or their pupils passed on, and which I just love, or just this era of romanticism that they had, and poetry, in the way that they spoke about music in every experience of life. If you if you read what they wrote as well. So I feel like I relate to it the most for these reasons, especially. But of course, there are also wonderful performers today as well. I just like your channel the best. And those old world geniuses.
And where did your interest in the pianists of the past come from? And I'm not just talking about the most famous ones, because your knowledge of the pianists, the interpreters from the first half of the 20th century is absolutely stratospheric.
First of all, I think I didn't have a lot of knowledge in this area. And then I started studying with Pnina. I was 15 years old. And then I was exposed to Alfred Cortot. I think he was the first one. Really, she used to ask me to bring Chopin etudes for her. Every lesson, a new etude, either Chopin or Moshkovsky. And whenever I brought Chopin, she had this cassette tape of Cortot playing the etudes. And she would put this on for me, and I was completely amazed by his playing. It was something the likes of which I haven't heard before. And this really speaking quality in his sound, and also the speeds are spectacular. I don't think anyone today plays in the speeds of Cortot or the Golden Age pianists. Some of the recordings that I've heard, are just incredible. So I started, I wanted to listen to more and more. And I think through that, and today we have YouTube, so really everything is at our disposal. Really, the music of the entire last century, and the amazing performance that we had. And then I just got to some historicals channel, and Symphonic Geist was one of them as well, and listened more and more. And I think also through reading about the tradition, I got to more pianists, also conductors that I really loved. And that's basically it.
What do you think about restraint at the piano? When I ask you this, I'm thinking of pianists like Wilhelm Kempff or Claudio Arrau, who tend to emphasize imagination or singing in all its sobriety. Is restraint ultimately a way of achieving the natural?
I think it really depends on the personality. I don't see Claudio Arrau as very restrained pianist. I think he's a very expressive and emotional, musician. But there is something about, understatement and keeping, the piece and the audience under this spell of music. It's not always about going forward, and there is also something about having the ability to keep silence, or or a mood, or or time standing still, really. So I do love it when there are performers who are able to to make this happen as well. You know Listen to the silence in the hall and not be afraid of it. That's to have this moment that everyone is not only breathing with you, is also being sometimes holding their breath. So I like it. And I think there are also lots of special moments. Yeah, it's sort of an anti-climax, but really it can be the climax of the piece as well.
And now a quite polemical question. Don't you get the impression that in the old days, in the Golden Age especially, musicians were less interested in the text itself than in what we might call the spirit of the work and the impression the performance made on the audience at the time? Basically, haven't we gained in authenticity by trying to get closer to the text? Or is it for you ultimately more neutral and therefore less interesting artistically?
I'm not sure that what we have today is actually more authentic or closer to the text, because the text, what we have on the page is, a bunch of circles and lines, and very technical, instructions, forte, piano, some slurs. But really, when you read what the great composers wrote about music, they talked about music as a language, as an expression of thought, of emotions, of images that they wanted to convey. So I think just playing the text, the dry notes is not enough. It's not more authentic. I think what would be authentic is to understand this code that through which they tried, to transmit so much more, far beyond, just notes and, music. And my teacher used to say, I interviewed her once about Paris in the 1930s. She studied there as a child with Alfred Cortot. And she told me, in Paris, it was, a shame to do whatever was written in the text. Sometimes there could be, they had the piano in the text and they could erase it and write forte instead. Because she said the instructions of the composer are very important, but piano, it's not, it doesn't mean that you have to play dolce. There are infinite, nuances of piano. There is a piano that screams, a piano that is dreamy, a piano that is full of hope, painful, a piano that whispers. So you really have to understand what it means. If Beethoven has a sforzando, in his music, it doesn't mean that you have to bang because because that's what's written. You have to understand the meaning of that sign within the context. And there are a lot of clues, I think, in the text that sort of direct us or send us in the right direction, interpretation-wise. And so I think, and also I think that authenticity, it has, two different poles, really. Nowadays, when people speak about authenticity, they usually talk about, doing whatever the composer wrote, maybe playing on period instruments. But there is also a matter of being authentic to yourself. And I think you can't play music well if you're not sincere, if you're not genuine, if you're not coming from, whatever experience that you really understand and empathize with. So it's wonderful to get into the composer's world and to research and to understand, the sound world and the style and everything, and of course, all of the instructions in the notes. I don't think that golden age pianists ignored the instructions. I think they read them very, very well, but they also try to understand what lies beyond them. And I think we still need to do that, because otherwise we won't be serving the composer as well as we want to. And we would do a disservice to the music and to ourselves as well, because there is no way that we can, connect to the meaning in the same way if we talk about some technical instruction, or if we also understand what we're trying to say through this instruction. And I think that today, when we think about singers or when we think about actors, for instance, I mean, it would be the most natural thing to say, well, an actor, when he plays a character, he needs to understand what this character feels. Yes, or what are its motivations, and really, live in this character in order to play it well. Or a singer, if they sing a song, you don't expect them just to sing the notes and the syllables and the words. You also want them, it would be natural to understand what they're singing about, right? What emotion, what image, where it comes from, and connect to it. So for us as instrumentalists, why do we expect less of ourselves? We also need to understand what the music talks about, just in the same manner. Otherwise, it's not enough.
And now, a less polemical question. Do you have any bedside records from the Golden Age?
Bedside records. Yes. First of all, I obviously my go-to pianists are my own musical ancestors, who are, Pnina. I still listen to all of her recordings, even though they're also etched in my brain, because I also used to turn pages for her when she was playing. So I listen to those a lot. Also, Alfred Boto, really, every time I listen to him, I learn something new and a new perspective on music that I sometimes heard, hundreds of times beforehand. I also admire Magda Taliaferro, and really many women pianists. Recently, I think in the last few years, I discovered Maria Yudina, and it blew up in my mind to hear her playing, the Schubert Sonata or the Schumann Fantasy. It was just incredible. And also Vladimir Horowitz is a personal favorite of mine. I feel like some things, when he reaches this golden, area where he's completely within the music. There is some really magical quality that, it's very rare to find. And William Capell is another one of my favorites that I really, really love. Yes, so these are sort of some of my favorites. I also love Glenn Gould sometimes, not all the time, but yeah, I do. Yes, the concerti that he recorded, the Beethoven concerti and the Bach, are really amazing, in my opinion. I also heard a really incredible rendition of La Waltz that he played, Ravel. He's in a completely, different world than some other performers. But I think when I mean, in his at his best, he's one of my favorites as well. Yeah, so these are some of my favorites.
Speaking about Vladimir Horowitz, about Horowitz playing Chopin's first ballad, the American critic, the famous American critic Harold Schoenberg, wrote, every time he played the piece, he had new ideas. He could never decide exactly what he wanted to do with it, but he was as indefatigable in his search as Lancelot in his quest for the Holy Grail. And you, Inbar, how do you know when you're close to a valid or rather authentic interpretation?
I think as long as you're honest with yourself, you're always close to a valid interpretation. It's not as if you're not trying to do something just for show or something artificial. As long as it's natural, it's close. But I think we always try to get closer and closer. And I think with the first ballad, I've played it since I was 13 years old. And every time I get back to this piece, I learn something new. And it doesn't mean that things that I played 20 years ago are going to be lesser than what I played now. But I think the piece has this tendency to evolve and grow with us. So when I am going through, a difficult period, I might play it in one way, and when I feel stronger and more triumphant in my life, maybe I'll play it in a different way. And there will be times that I feel more hopeless or more hopeful, and it will also come across in the way that I play and in what I see in the music. So I think every one of these interpretations is valid. At the same time, I think it would be as close to the piece as we sense it at that time. And as long as we're true to ourselves, I think that's the best that we can do to create a true interpretation, because really none of us went to kindergarten with Bach or Mozart or Chopin, or so I think in order to do something authentic, as I said before, you need to be authentic to yourself.
By the way, what's your favorite version of Chopin's first ballad?
That's difficult.
Yes, that's difficult.
I have to tell you, when I was 8 years old and we got this cassette tape of Rubinstein playing Chopin, I thought that each one of the pieces that he played there, including the first ballad, was definitely the most perfect version of this music, because I just loved it and I didn't know anything else at the time. And then I started playing, and a few years later, I think it took me 5 or 6 years until I got to play the ballad myself. And I still remembered this early version. And I said to myself, I have to listen to it, because this was the utmost perfection, the way Rubinstein played it. And then I listened to it and I said to myself, actually there would be some things that I'd prefer differently, So I think as I get to know a piece, there is this ideal in my mind. I'm not sure that anyone comes close to what there is. At the same time, whenever I hear a great interpreter, a great performer, I always learn things, and sometimes they catch me by surprise and they say, "Oh wow, that's really incredible the way that they did this. I never thought of that." So I'm not sure if I can, pinpoint one, performance that I prefer right now. But I will always remember this Rubinstein recording is something that I really loved, at least at the time.
Speaking about interpretation in general, how would you define this famous concept of authenticity? Does authenticity automatically presage a good interpretation? Can intention, however pure, stand on its own?
Yes, I think first of all, the intention that we have as we play, I think that's actually the most important thing. Look, authenticity, I think it's very important, but at the same time, when from the point that the composer releases the piece into the world, it can go through so many, transitions and transformations. And I think if you look at Bach's music, and today so many people want to be authentic to Bach, but Bach himself, he transcribed so many pieces. He took a Vivaldi Concerto Grosso and played it on the organ. And his own pieces that he wrote for one instrument, then he sometimes he didn't even mention the instrument because he was expecting people to play it on whatever they could at the era. So I think, as I said before, the most important thing is really to be true to yourself and do something with an intention that is genuine. And if you look at some performers, Glenn Gould, for instance, even Rachmaninoff, by the way, they took a piece and what was important for them is not necessarily to understand where the composer came from, but they looked at the music and they wanted to understand the music, the architecture, and the phrasing, and the whatever they could find within it, and construct it to the best of their ability. So it could happen that a performer, a gifted performer, can also transcend, the original meaning of the composer at times, I think. I think there is this really hilarious story about Rachmaninoff and Horowitz, because they were good friends. And I think Horowitz played Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto with Eugene Ormandy. And later on, Rachmaninoff was asked about the concerto. He says, "Oh, that's Horowitz's," because he was so, in awe of the way that Horowitz played it. But when Rachmaninoff himself played the concerto with Ormandy a few years later, there is a story that he really went to Ormandy and asked him, "How does Horowitz play this?" And he's the composer, so he would know about authenticity more than anyone. But at the same time, apparently Horowitz, revealed some qualities in his piece that he admired, and was surprised with. So that's also completely valid. So really, I think in that sense, interpretation doesn't necessarily mean being, completely following every instruction in the text. But I think it's understanding what you have in front of you in the music and really doing the best with whatever tools that you have at your disposal to bring this music forward.
Generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that you feel particularly close to the music of the Romantic period. What is it that links you so closely to this music?
Just the music itself. It's very beautiful. It's so expressive. I feel it speaks to my heart very closely. At the same time, I adore Mozart's music, and there are things that touch my heart just as much as Chopin or Schumann or anything else. And Bach and Scarlatti, even the smallest sonatas sometimes are they're incredible masterpieces in my opinion. And Beethoven, I admire this. There is this enormous embrace of the entire humanity that you feel in his music, and and how powerful it is, really, the struggles and and the hope. So I'm not sure it's just about the romantic. And Debussy, it's like music of my childhood. It's like it's a dream of so many things. So it's and I continue to discover other pieces and composers that I really fall in love with. But it's really about the expressiveness and the emotion, and really not shying away from giving all of your heart that touches me in that period specifically. And Chopin is by far the music of love and longing that I feel very close to.
When you are constructing an interpretation, do you sometimes feel you have to go against yourself? Can it be a struggle?
Usually I don't.
But
sometimes there are some places that I don't necessarily like the music in first sight. And then I have to find a way to play it that would suit me. And in those moments, I struggle at times, or sometimes I find an instruction that I don't really understand, and I try to understand better. And sometimes I'll go along with that instruction, and sometimes, go over it a little bit quickly until I get to another part that I like better. For instance, I played Chopin's Nocturne Opus 48 number 2. It's an incredible piece, really beautiful. And the middle section, I don't really love it. I don't understand it completely. I have to say, I apologize. And then, I understood something. I played it in a recital a couple of days ago. And I said to myself, you know what? You don't really have to love this piece. The important thing is that you really love the first part, and then the closing part, the third section. And then, I think it's Da Vinci that said that if you put the beautiful next to the ugly, the beautiful will become so much more beautiful. So really, after you have this, middle section in the Nocturne, which is a little, I like a little bit less, but then you go back to the first theme, which is incredibly beautiful, and then it goes beyond. It goes on to be more, tragic and expressive, and really there is this obsessive quality about this music. Then it becomes so much stronger after this, intermezzo, this break in the middle, which is a little bit less expressive. So sometimes I have to understand music in those terms as well. But yeah, I try to find some meaning to it, or some way to get through it that will, that we'll become friends before I play it. And most of the time, I think I succeed. I hope I succeed.
And finally, Inbar, this is my last question. Do you have any new projects for the future?
Yes, I've recently been working on an album, which really occupied me in the last several months. It's an album that involves music by Chopin and by two of his pupils from the Rothschild family, Mathilde and Charlotte. And I recorded it recently at the end of January. I recorded it at the Menuhin Hall in London, and I'm very excited about it because I'm playing some amazing Chopin pieces, most of which were dedicated to the Rothschild family, like the Fourth Ballade and a couple of waltzes, famous waltzes that he wrote. And the first mazurka that I ever played, which is actually the first Chopin piece that I ever played, which apparently he drafted the version, the first version of this mazurka in a book of the Rothschild family called Livre d'Or, the Golden Book. So I am playing all of these pieces, nocturnes, mazurkas, waltzes, the ballade, and alongside pieces by Mathilde de Rothschild and Charlotte de Rothschild, who were both pupils of Chopin. And really, it opens a very interesting window to a composer that I loved and identified with since I was a child. And their pieces are very beautiful as well. And I think it's interesting both because of their compositional style, but also the performance tradition, because you see some of their instruction, especially Mathilde's, which was quite meticulous in the way that she pedaled things or phrased things. And it's really similar to the tradition that I grew up on, because Pnina was a pupil of Goto, and Goto, of course, was a pupil of Chopin's pupil. So it's really a tradition that went on from teacher to pupil. And I could find it in the score, and it was an incredible treasure for me to just discover. And that's hopefully coming out in the next year. So I'll keep you posted about it as well.
Thank you so much, Inbar, for this interview. It was, of course, a great pleasure. And I hope we'll have the chance to work together for many years to come. And being here in front of the camera is the occasion to thank you again for all this help and all the work you've done for me, for this channel, over the last few years.
Thank you, Guillaume. It was my absolute pleasure to get to know you and the channel as well. And really, it's incredible work that you're doing. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. Thank you.
In return, I'd like to invite everyone to subscribe to your own YouTube channel. The link is, of course, in the description of this video. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of you who have watched this interview until the end. And I look forward to seeing you soon for new musical adventures. And on that very last note, bye.